Good evening, everybody. Another edition of On the Road again with Shaggy. And it's afternoon, headed to a client. Thought I would record another quick one for you guys. Hopefully you're enjoying these. As always, looking for your feedback as to what topics you would be interested in. I know sometimes these get a little political, but that's just because that's what's dominating in the news nowadays. So if you've got something in particular that you want to hear about, you want to know my opinion of, or you just want to, get it out there for the conversation, as always, don't forget the email address is available on the road again at ptrradio.com. Those will come straight to me, and then we can bring those up as topics, and we can see what you guys think. You'll get to hear what I think, and who knows, maybe we'll start this little conversation going along. So, also, get it out there right away. I want to thank everybody, all of our new subscribers. I know we've got a couple of you out there. Hopefully you enjoy these little tidbits in between the main PTR radio shows. We do our regular 2-hour show every 2 weeks. And then in between you get this. You get thoughts of mine throughout the week in between my places that I have to go. So let's just go ahead and get right into the conversation for today. And it happens to be this Indianapolis, Indiana story, where I believe it's Brownsburg teacher is suing the school district over their transgender name policy. Now, you would think that that would mean that the teacher wants to be identified as, Sally, and he's really a Ken. Well, that's not actually the case this time. The case is that the school district has put out a policy, and they put out this policy 3 weeks before school ended, I assume, for inclusion into the next school year. The policy states that if a child wishes to be identified as a different gender's identity, meaning their name, they want to be identified by a different gender's name, then the teacher is to do that. And this teacher said, no, that is against my religious right. That is against my freedom of religion. I believe that you are born how you are born, and I refuse to acknowledge what in my mind is a mental disorder. Or to promote this behavior, I think is the way that he actually put it. He refused to promote the behavior by identifying the child as a name other than their own. Okay? Or one identified with a particular gender. Now, here's an issue with kind of both sides of it, a little bit, I guess. So, the school is saying, this is for the child's well-being because calling them something other than what they identify with could be damaging to their psyche or their self-respect or whatever. Okay, that's fine, but also know that you're just sheltering them from inevitability that's going to happen. All right, so I understand school is supposed to be a non-judgmental zone that they're supposed to be able to be safe in and not feel pressured in. Okay, fine. I get that. All right, just know that in the real world, there's pressure everywhere. But from the teacher's perspective, I kind of don't understand his reasoning here. Because for his reasoning, you would have to say that there are definite gender identities given to particular names. And I think that is not necessarily always true. So you're on shaky ground already. All right? For example, Terry, Chris, as I get, every once in a while, there are these dual identity names that go for both male and female. So for these ubiquitous names, what does his religion say is right then? I mean, how does he call these people? in those scenarios? Does he, use their middle names? And also that brings up another case. What about a kid who doesn't want to be known by Christopher or Matthew, and instead he wants to go by Matt or Chris? In those cases, this teacher is using a nickname or a shortened name. That's not the God-given name that he was assigned. It's not his legal name. So I think he runs into a little bit of a foul here. All right? Because the problem is with the law, you have to establish a pattern and stick with it. And, I think he's going to have a problem saying that he always does X or he always does Y. And, there are no exceptions. And so that's I think, going to be a fly in his ointment, per se. Now, that's not to mean that he doesn't have a leg to stand on. Obviously, he does have the right to freedom of religion, freedom of religious expression. But another thing going against him is this is a public school. So you have separation of church and state at practice here. So as a government employee, his religious views cannot override what the state says is going to be policy. Okay? As long as the state isn't asking for something which is completely ridiculous. Alright? And in this case, they're really not. They're just saying, hey, identify this child as this or that or the other. Alright? It is not anything that is, going to be blatantly wrong or patently, damaging to the child or anything like that. Nor is it going to cause any academic issues or anything, there's nothing here that he could have a legal footing on saying that the state is doing improperly, as the laws sit today. Because you can be identified by whatever nickname, per se, you wouldn't want to be identified for. Now, that's not to say that on legal documents, so if it was standardized tests or things like that the kids shouldn't write down what their legal names are. That could be a sticking point here. But they didn't actually bring that up in the briefings that I read. So when the state didn't, go into that level of detail in their policy. So I don't know. I mean, what's your thoughts? Is it, is it right? Is it wrong? I know this is a big argument going on as to, are we doing the children more harm than good by, embracing these thoughts, and these attitudes with them? What is the real damage of calling somebody something different? I don't know. I'm not in that situation. I've always been heterosexual, so I don't know where the line is drawn and where the damage can be done. I would rather err on the side of do no harm, if there is such a thing. And it could be a little bit gray here. Who knows? I'm curious as to what your thoughts are. And I guess that's really it for that story. Because I'm kind of out of speed on that one. I will say there was another story this week, which is very abrasive, and people either come down one side or they come down the other. And I will, I think it'll be kind of obvious which side I come down on, but I'm just going to tell you from a legal perspective, here's what happened. So this week also we had what's referred to as the racist baker case. Or not racist baker, but the homophobic baker case. So we had a baker who refused to bake a cake for a same-sex marriage reception, and they ended up suing because they were saying they were being denied a service which was protected under the Equal Rights Act of the state that they were in. Now, a little bit of history here, folks. Federal law does not protect sexual identity or sexual orientation. All right, there is no federal law which protects against discrimination for sexual identity or sexual orientation. That right now currently is left up to the individual states to implement discrimination laws for those. We do have federal level discrimination laws for disability, age, race, and religion. So those are considered protected classes according to the feds. You cannot discriminate for someone based on their religion or lack thereof when delivering a service, nor can you discriminate against someone's color or ethnic background or anything like that. All right, but as I said, the sexual orientation is still a state-based decision. So the states can expand the list of protected classes, but they cannot restrict it. So this particular state expanded it to include sexual orientation and sexual preference and sexual identity. So is the baker wrong? Well, initially the courts found yes, he was wrong, and he was required to do training and a whole bunch of things with his staff. He then appealed that decision. He was then found in the state Supreme Court to be in the wrong. However, then that was appealed to the federal grand jury or federal Supreme Court. And the federal Supreme Court recently ruled that the lower Supreme Court messed up their ruling. Now, a lot of people were saying that this was a victory for the baker. It really wasn't. They did not rule in favor of the baker. They ruled against the state court. So what they said, if you read it carefully, was that the state court was not equal in their application of the protection law. So what they said was they were granting one classification of protection higher due than the other. So they said that so what the federal Supreme Court said was that the state court was giving higher precedence to sexual orientation than they were to the freedom of religious expression and the protection of religious values, and that they could not do that as a basis for their decision. So they did not find in favor of the baker. They find against the court ruling. So what that basically means is that it's still up in the air. All right, they would have to go back to court and have it redecided. In fact, the court's opinion even said that the state's rights to enforce anti-discrimination laws were the deciding factor here, and that they would ultimately be the law that was enforced. However, as they saw it presented, there was a bias against the religious protection given to the baker. So, for everybody claiming that the baker won, he didn't win yet. That's not to say that he won't. That's not to say that he will. He just didn't win yet. All right? What got me upset were the comments. All right? Because the story is one thing. The story's fact. You can look at it. You can read it from both sides. But the story is fact. All right? That's a legal briefing. That's a legal opinion. It was 7-2. All right? But the comments is where the vitriol comes out. All right? That is where the real anger and angst and everything comes out. And I think it's also where the real short-sightedness of people comes out. Okay? So many of the comments said, remember the days where you could put up a sign that said no shirt, no shoes, no service, or owner has the right to refuse service for any reason, and you could enforce it instead of these liberal snowflakes getting their feelings hurt and suing. All right? And all these others, MAGA and everything else. And, what I draw a parallel to, and they're all saying, oh, time to bring the signs back. What I bring a parallel to is, you know what? It wasn't that long ago that we had signs in the windows that said no blacks allowed. All right? And the exact same reasons why people are stroking the fire today, were used back then. They actually used the Bible as a reason for denying people the right to marry. All right, to say that interracial marriage would be against the law. They were quoting the Bible. All right, they were quoting the Bible saying that blacks weren't the same as whites. So be real careful here when you're saying remember the good old days and let's bring them back, because sometimes you're drawing a parallel and you don't even see it, and you're wishing for a day which, in hindsight, I think we all agree is reprehensible. All right? It just doesn't make any sense. And why doesn't it make any sense? Because we've evolved. All right? We understand that what we did was wrong. The funny thing about evolution is you don't know it until after you've gone through it. Everybody thought that they were right and that they were just and that they were on the good side of history before it was history. Okay? So don't be so quick. Don't be so quick to wish for the days of yesteryear, because they weren't that great. Not with hoses and everything else. And I wasn't alive during those times, but I've seen the video. And I don't want to get back to a point. And this country is very, unfortunately, quickly returning back to those days. We have a vocal minority that is largely chanting echoes of the past. And it's scary. So, like I said, you can have an opinion, but you need to be careful with your opinion. You need to think your opinion through, and you need to look at your opinion through a very careful lens. And you need to think about what your children will think of your opinion and how you want to be remembered. And with that said, folks, I am at my destination, so I will see you the next time I'm on the road.